Hello, good afternoon. Can you hear me all right? Yeah? Great. Okay, so I'll probably be nervous for a minute or two and then I'll calm down. So, this afternoon we're going to go back to the 1960s. And there's quite a lot of young people who wish they'd lived through it, and there'll be some of us here who did live through it. Yeah, and it's all good. Whichever way it is. But in honor of the 1960s, I'm going to let my hair down. So, I just have to make a comment about my publisher. That was wonderful. I got a notification, an email 2 weeks ago saying my publisher had gone into liquidation voluntarily, and but I have another one, another publisher. And things are already online. So it's a different name to the people in the book, but they're very good, and I'm looking forward to working with them. So that's that. And first of all, I'm going to show you lots of pictures, and then I'm going to play some music, and then I'm going to read from the book. So there we are. That's the order of proceedings. So that's the cover of the book. Going back to the beginning. So on the left's my mum and dad, Audrey and Hector, and on the right is Alvin's mum and dad, Sam and Doris. And we all came from Nottingham. We were all in Nottingham, so that's where it all started. That's where I was born. The Rose of England, in the middle of Nottingham. It's a listed building now. It's Victorian Gothic. And that's me on the left as a little thing. And I still feel like I am that person. It's amazing. I love that picture because it's really how I feel. And on the right is Alvin in the arms of his elder sister Janice. Lovely chubby boy he was too. And that's me with my 2 brothers, Graham on the left and Barry on the right. And me, my mother was very pleased to get a daughter, 3rd one along, and said, my little Dolly, as you see. So my lovely straight hair became permed, and, even at that age, but we won't go there. So, for now, it's in the book. This is a really lovely picture. This is Sam on the left with Alvin at Butlins holiday camp. And I think that he's in like a lovely toddler group or a lovely young guy. Sam's he's number 24. And I'm on the right with my dad. I was singing Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. It was a Christmas party. And I love the gawpy guys in the background with their party hats on. This is Alvin on the beach. And it looks like Sam's had a hand in building the sand castles with him, I think. Because Sam did work in building and all of that. So. And this is the pub that I moved to and lived there at the time that I met Alvin. And we moved there when I was 8, the Newcastle Arms. And this is all in Nottingham. And this is Alvin with one of his first guitars, not the first. I don't have a picture of that. But this one, he was 15 here, and this guitar is a Burns. And you see it's about the more knobs, the better at this point. There's plenty of them on there. And this is in their early bands, and Leo in the foreground here on the left, who played with Alvin and played with him right through his career with 10 years after. And on the right, and this band was called Farron Christie and the J-Cats. And this is, wrong way. Oh no, that's it. So this is the Jaybirds, and that's the band that Alvin was in when I met him. So that's him, and Leo Lyons, the bass player, and Dave Quickmire was the drummer. He didn't end up being the drummer, but he was at that point. And this is Alvin in the back garden. This is at the time we met, when I was very blonde. And so was he, if this was a colour picture. And this is our second night together. And we were completely so oblivious at the Locarno in Nottingham that that's what we did. And actually, that's what we did for the first 2 weeks I knew him, pretty much. It seemed like we got caught up by the lips and couldn't unhook. And here's me on the left, and Alvin on the right. I was 16, and I was 17 a week after I'd met him, and he was 19 in the December of that year. So he's still quite a podgy chap there. Well, and I'm quite a podgy girl. This is the Farron Christie and the Jaybirds van. This is about vehicles, really. And that's Leo on the left. And this is the van that became the Jaybirds van and became our passion wagon, as you had in those days. Because that was it, we were both still living at home, so, you know. You find a way, don't you? So this is a little car that he did have, which was a kit-built car called a Barclay. And we had a lot of fun in that. We went on our first holiday together to Sheringham, to Norfolk, in Norfolk. Yeah, that was a great holiday. We were in a small boarding house, and we took 2 single rooms because we were young and embarrassed and didn't want to make a fuss. On the left here is the Jaybirds van, as it now was the Jaybirds van. And there's Sam Barnes, Alvin's dad, who was just the most amazing support to Alvin and the band all the time. He was the sort of father that would get up at 3 in the morning when they were snowed in Snake Pass and get out of bed and go and rescue them, even though he got to work the next day. And there's Alvin on the right in the Barclay again. And this is Alvin as James Bond. He always liked to lock about, so this is a photo I took of him inside his mum and dad's. And there he was with a fake gun, pretending he was James Bond. And that was the car that he had. Again, a gangster car. Doing that to me. That's better. So that was me when I was 14 with a Brenda Lee beehive hairdo. And the one on the right, I was 18, 19 by then. And pretty much who I am still. And this is Alvin on the left. No longer podgy. This is in 1965, and by then he really wasn't a podgy anymore. Jesse Fuller is the gentleman in the middle, and Doris on the right. And the photo on the right actually has "Oh, my love, Graham," because when I met Alvin, he wasn't Alvin Lee, he was Graham Barnes, because that was what he was born as. And he was Graham to me till we moved to London. I was modelling and he was doing photography, and so this is me being a model. This is when we first moved to London. And I decided for a hairdo for Alvin, I would cut him a point there, 2 points there, and 2 points at the back. Pretty silly. Anyway, this is in our first very tiny flat that we were in Victoria, which was a studio flat, literally. You know, a kitchen and cupboards and a shower in a cupboard and all those things. It was fun though. And now this needs a little explanation, doesn't it? So I had some wigs because I'd been modelling in London. So the picture on the left is Alvin with his dad in my wig. I say, he did like to lock about. And the picture on the right is Alvin and Doris and me. By this point, I was a hippie, as you see. And even here, he couldn't resist pulling his face on the right. Nice. And the curly hair, by the way, was definitely a tribute to Jimi Hendrix, which Eric Clapton also did. He had a perm at the same time. This is in Regent Street in London. So you see, we did go out dressed like this. It wasn't just fancy dress. And with Doris. This is coming from Hamleys. Alvin loved a toy shop. And on the right, on the steps at Warwick Square, with my younger brother there next to Alvin and Sam and Doris. This next picture is very interesting. It's when they were, it's the, oh, why have you done that again? There we go, get rid of you. This is a shot in the TWA terminal in New York. So this was when they'd first gone out on tour. And Alvin still had his curly hair. The guy on the left in the front is Chris Wright, their English manager, and then the guy on his right, on his left, is Dee Anthony, who was a New York manager and very, yeah. I think Alvin kind of fantasized that it was my Colonel Tom, you know. Or his Colonel Tom, I should say, not mine. And Rick on the left of Alvin, and Leo on the right there. That was the end of the curly hair. And that's how he looked. And this is 1968 now in London. And this is what this is this tiny little flat we lived in, and this is what we liked to do a lot, was talk. We were great talkers. You see how small that place is? And here you see the red gel over the black and white television enables you to have a colour telly. Of course it does. And this picture, Dee had bought them all these chairs. I thought it was fantastic. So this was Eddie's birthday. That's why he's wearing a paper crown. Or maybe it was Christmas, yeah, something of that sort. And this is that little flat. That was how we'd painted and decorated it. When we left this wonderful mural on the wall. And the young lady, blonde lady in the front, Vivian, she was the one who'd painted that onto the wall. My brother's next to Alvin, and all these various people are friends, and part of his band, my brother decided he'd have a band called Life Without Mother, and they were part of that. And this is us leaning out the window at Warwick Square. So it was a very tall, high building. There was lots of stairs to go up. Right, now I'm in America on the right, at JFK, at Christmas time. And Alvin had bought these two hats in the thrift store. And I love these hats. And so left is in the BBC studio. And yeah. Me doing what I did best, wear a hat, smile, and read a book. Wait, because there's a lot of waiting goes on, of course. This is Alvin unusually with a fender, which is an unusual thing to see. Left again at the BBC and right in Warwick Square. And this next picture is specially for Alistair, who's brought in a copy of the Stonehenge album. And this was the original cover that I wanted it to be, but it ended up being a painting, which really wasn't as fantastic. But this was from an AA book, and the AA wanted a fortune for it, so that was it. So then we've moved again. This time we've moved to a Mews cottage, and that was Gloucester Place Mews, which is off of Gloucester Place in London. And I'm doing what I like to do on the right. I've got some fabric, and I'm going to either make some clothes or make some curtains or something. And this is me with Chrissy Wood at Chrissy and Ronnie's flat in Sloane Square. And I knew Chrissy became a really dear friend to me and was a friend to me all of her life. She sadly left us in 2005. And we were great pals. Mainly we were great pals because she was so in love with Ronnie and she didn't have eyes for Alvin, which was quite unusual because so many women did. And that's in the same flat. This is on the self-timer. No selfies in those days, you'll note, but self-timers. This is a fun picture at Chris Wright's wedding, their manager. Johnny Clifton on the left was Alvin's. He had introduced me to Alvin, and he was a friend of Alvin's from when we were both in our early teens. And Judy, his lovely lady next to him. And Andy Jaworski's the next fellow along, next to the lady in the big hat. And he was their road manager, who was just amazing and always smiling. You'll see other pictures of Andy. And me, of course. And Dorothy, who is a councillor now, Conservative councillor for Epsom and Ewell. So, not married to Andy anymore. He now lives in America. This is me, a lovely picture, backstage at the Albert Hall. I like that one. And this is in America with Chick the organist and Suzanne, who he got together with at the Isle of Wight Festival in 1970. I did love these boots, these platform boots that were the order of the day. Here I am on the road in America with Leo and Chick. And here I am with a couple of groupies. And it's just what you do, you know, you have to, I'm traveling and changing clothes every day and moving around, and they've got themselves ready, and they've probably been waiting since last year when the band was there. This is me and Andy, and yeah, take a picture, don't help. No, it was fun. And this is the band, same jacket, and this is the band waiting at the airport. Leo and Sally on the left, and Rick and Ruth Ann, his lady, and Chris Wright there peering from behind, who's definitely now become very long-haired and bearded. And this is on the steps of a hotel somewhere in Europe, and Sally next to me and Shelley. Sally's in the red, and Shelley was Chris Wright's first wife, and she and I got along really well. She's a Californian, and she liked to get high, which none of the others did, and I did, so obviously we had a good time together. And this is a couple of guys from Supertramp, because that was the tour they were on with the band. This is me, as usual. This is a series here of pictures posing, because that was my job. That wasn't my car. We were in Rome. Go and pose by that. All right. Jolly good. I look like it's mine, and I'm a cool Italian. And here we are in Anchorage, in Alaska. A polar bear. Go and pose. Fine. They're big. They really are. It's in the airport in Anchorage. This is what happens when a limousine breaks down, when you're on the way to somewhere. Oh well, there's Doc on the right, who's a great driver. And this is in a hotel on Bourbon Street, on the balcony. And these are the sort of things that happen on the road. This was my kit for making a room into a cosy place. So put a shawl over the lamp and put the records on. This is the other side of things, sorting out the luggage for the next day. Now just go and sit on that bench and I'll take your picture. How incongruous was that? And Alvin was getting very arty with his camera by then. He'd got a Nikon F and he loved it. And that was in the days when this was all colour slides. So he'd scanned them and sent them to me in about 2009. I hadn't seen them since 1960s, so that was quite a surprise. This is a kind of self-portrait with candelabra. And Alvin there in the middle with his camera and me. And this is one taken by a photographer backstage somewhere. Oh, Boston, actually. There's a lot of sitting waiting. This is what you see Alvin's hands still, he's still playing. This is waiting to go on stage, obviously. And this is in Las Vegas, waiting to see Elvis in 1971. And that's all of us around the table. And the road crew at the end. Nobody got left out. It was fantastic. And but we were actually very disappointed in him because it was like cabaret, obviously. It was Las Vegas. There was a lot of corny things like when he sang Teddy Bear, there was a guy with him handing out little teddy bears. I found that a bit difficult. Here we are in Jamaica. Probably my favourite place in the world. And hanging out at the end of a 12-week tour and winding down. And I discovered it takes you to about the third day before you've actually wound down. And this is one of my favourite pictures of me because what a left thigh that was. And Woodstock. Well, this was the poster for the film. And no one who was there will ever be the same, it says. This is me at Woodstock in the hat, and Alvin and Dee Anthony talking business like they still were doing backstage because it was all about timing and who goes on when. And the storm, yeah, that when we get to Woodstock when I read from the book. And this is us at the premiere in New York of the Woodstock film in 1970. So the film came out obviously after 6 months after the festival. These are two pictures I like that were taken backstage in New York at the Fillmore East. And by the same photographer. Alvin on stage doing what everybody's seen him doing endlessly. Using the microphone stand as a slide. And that's one of my favourite publicity shots of him. That was really what he'd become from the young man in Nottingham. And yeah, I made those trousers. I mean, I made so many of his clothes, it was ridiculous. He hated going clothes shopping. The jacket his mother had made years before, and he wore that and wore it. This is in the garden of the first house we bought in the country. This house was called Robin Hood Barn, and we came from Nottingham. And that's Chris, Shally there. And that's the front of the house, and Alvin with the key of the door. So that was the first house we owned. And that's the back of the house, and me and my usual paint splattered, because I was doing all the painting and decorating in there. So in the garden with Sam and Doris and my mum and dad. My mum became very blonde in about her 40s, I think, and continued to be till she was in her 80s. She only went grey in her 90s. This I put in really for historical reference. Yeah, it's for the cars, for any car buffs, because this really was from the time, although I look like I could almost be today. I mean, not like I look today, but like I could be a young person today. Waitrose. This is what Alvin did at Robin Hood Barn. He became Robin Hood. And he got a motorbike. He liked riding that around as well. We sold Robin Hood Barn for 10 times what we bought it for 2 years afterwards. And this was where we moved to. And that was when things really started to go wrong. This had 50 acres with it and was in the Oxfordshire countryside, called Hook End. Hook End Manor. It had been Hook End Farm, but the previous owner decided he wanted to call it Hook End Manor. And here I am by the pool there with Woody and Chrissy and me. And it's definitely winter time because those logs in the pool are to stop it from cracking if it freezes. And that's me with Chris. And this is the last picture of me that Alvin took at Hook End. And this next one's many years later, and it's the last picture I had taken with Alvin in 2007 in Spain. And Evie, who is his widow, and this is just here for the hell of it because this was in Atlanta, Georgia. That was a musician's Harley that we were staying with. So this was Alvin's fantasy of being an American, I suppose, at that point. I remember we went for a ride and I was on the back, and when we got back he did a wheelie with me on the back, which was kind of interesting. So now what I want to do is play you the Woodstock, but not the whole 11 minutes, but it's time you heard some music. So this is Alvin at Woodstock and 10 years after. And this is a 5-minute version.
Called I'm Going Home by Helicopter. Where it gets falling down. You stomp. You stomp. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh baby. Oh baby, baby, baby. Look out, babe, I'm coming to get you one more time. Please, everyone, thank you for 10 years after.
Okay. Well, now I've gone back to the beginning, which wasn't my intention. Never mind. I'll put that there. How's that? Ah. Yeah, if you could. I've got a young lady here who knows what to do to get me out of this. No, I want the black screen, really. Yeah. Thanks. That was it? Yeah. Brilliant. Thanks very much. Okay. So now what I'm going to do for you all is read from the book. And I'm going to go again right back to the beginning and start with how the book starts. So, rock and roll, as we now know it, did not exist when I was born on November the 10th, 1946 in Nottingham, a city in the middle of England. Rock and roll was as embryonic as I was before my arrival on a Sunday evening at 10:30, weighing 10.5 pounds, 10 days later than my due date. Yes, 10 surrounded my birth. My parents were publicans, and the pump they ran in the centre of Nottingham on Mansfield Road was called the Rose of England. It was our home, and I was born there on the second floor. The Rose was an imposing Victorian Gothic revival building whose architect, Watson Fothergill, was responsible for many wonderful buildings around Nottingham, some of which were sadly demolished in the brutalist architectural era of the 60s. The Rose of England avoided the wrecking ball and today is a Grade 2 listed building with a preservation order. Alvin Lee, as he would come to be known, did not exist when I was born, though Graham Anthony Barnes was born almost 2 years earlier, 2.5 miles across town, on December the 19th, 1944. It wouldn't be until his teens that he became Alvin Lee, his chosen stage name. Why Alvin Lee? I asked him in 1963 when we were first together. It was as close as I could get to Elvis Presley, Alvin Lee, he replied, adding with an emphasis on the syllables, Elvis Presley, Alvin Lee, without being obvious. Well, all young guys at that time wanted to be Elvis. Not long ago I watched an interview with Bob Dylan on YouTube. I wanted to be Elvis, everyone did, he said. All the Beatles wanted to be Elvis, and Alvin Lee seemed a perfect choice to me. Later in his life, he would claim his membership of the Elvis fan club was about guitarist Scotty Moore, not Elvis. Early pictures of Alvin with his blonde quiff, duck's arse hairdo, jeans, bomber jackets, black leather Cuban heel boots, just as he looked when we met, show that Elvis was his stylist. It was a great look. Nothing like the typical young Nottingham guys in their dark, single-breasted Italian pinstripe suits, skinny ties with matching imitation hanky on a piece of cardboard in their breast pocket, and black pointed winkle pickers. He stood out, walked his own path, relaxed, confident, seemingly clearly focused. He was a charismatic teenager. It was this Elvis Presley-Scotty Moore dichotomy that Alvin struggled with throughout 10 years after his huge success, especially after the Woodstock movie gave his full-screen, beautiful face the pop star fame of an Elvis. His heart and soul were in the extraordinary virtuosity he expressed through his guitar, the cherry red Gibson ES-335 he called Big Red, and played into outer space. Alvin had all the talent, musicality, looks and attributes to find a perfect fit in the times in which he lived. It should have been obvious to everyone from his mid-teens, and today it would have been spotted very early. However, rock and roll music was a frontier in early stages of exploration, not yet a country with its own territories, government, history, or a map to plan your route to lifelong success. Alvin was a British pioneer of this new frontier. When we met, we were both teenagers living with our parents in Nottingham. Until 1966, when we lived together in London, he was Graham to me. I have photos, postcards, and even a cookery book, unused, dedicated to me and signed Graham. We met in November 1963 and were together until September 1973, close to 10 years. From living at home with our parents in Nottingham to living in a huge half-timbered Tudor mansion in the Oxford countryside, 50 acres of which we owned. It's hard to believe it was possible for such a journey to happen. It certainly wasn't a trajectory we expected, imagined or dared to dream about back in Nottingham in 1963. So this is a section now about Alvin's young life, from when he was a teenager. Creative people are often clear at a young age about exactly what they want to do, obsessed with perfecting their skills and finding little to engage them in the rest of their schooling. Graham started his musical career playing the clarinet. His vocalist sister Janice, her husband-to-be, George, played clarinet in a local jazz band, and this would have influenced his choice. There were also acoustic guitars at Toston Drive, which Sam and Doris both played. Doris told me the advent of skiffle and Lonnie Donegan, its principal exponent, turned Graham's attention towards the guitar. John Lennon was the same. Donegan played banjo in Chris Barber's jazz band, and it was Chris who brought Big Bill Broonzy, Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee, and Muddy Waters to Britain for tours in the early 50s. Through their open-minded love of music and fearless cultural explorations, these two bandmates, Donegan and Barber, were the catalyst for much of the music of 60s Britain. Sam Barnes, Alvin's dad, with his great love of blues, went to see these original black blues men on tour at the TBI Inn, a pub by the river in Nottingham. Later that evening, Sam and Doris persuaded him to come back to Toston Drive. They went to see, Big Bill Brunsey. Alvin told me he was a bit grumpy at being woken, he was 12 years old, from a deep sleep when he went to the lounge to find the much larger-than-life Brunsey playing guitar and singing the blues. He was amazed. He sat on the floor at Big Bill's feet, and despite having grown up hearing Sam's blues records, found this real-life encounter a mesmerizing epiphany. Brunsey was a beautiful 6-foot-tall, charismatic black man, a musical god in his living room, and he never forgot this experience. In 1957, Sam and Doris sent away by mail order to buy Graham his first electric guitar, a Gaia-tone made by one of the earliest Japanese manufacturers. He told me it was the most thrilling day of his life. He came racing home from school and tore open the delivery box to reveal the guitar in its velvet-lined case. He thought it was beautiful. He was over the moon and so happy, said Doris. We could see that this was his instrument without a doubt. He practiced every single minute he could and got on like crazy with it so quickly. It was then I knew the talent was there and nothing would stop him. He was 12 years old and a year later he was playing in a band. Maybe it was during this year when he turned 13 that he invented Alvin Lee, his stage name. Young guitarists today have decades of rock guitarists to listen to and to copy, to learn their licks, but that was not how it was for the budding Alvin Lee. There were no British rock guitarists, but Scotty Moore, Elvis's guitarist, and Chuck Berry were influences that could be heard throughout his long career. His lifelong friend Johnny Clifton showed Graham how to play Chuck Berry riffs. He soaked up whatever I showed him. He was really inquisitive, eager to learn, said Johnny. For a while, Johnny played guitar in Alan Upton and the Jailbreakers with young Graham. Talking about Ivan J and the J-Cats, the forerunners to the Jaybirds, Johnny said, Ivan wore a lavender jacket, had bleached blonde hair, but couldn't sing in tune. I love those early 60s band names. Escaping from the pub one evening, I first met Johnny Clifton at Baseford Wakes on Billy Bacon's Field, a local fairground. On fairground rides like the Dodgems and the Waltzers, rock and roll was played very loud, further heightening the experience of being spun round and up and down, all the thrill of the fair. We loved rock and roll and were mates, part of a local gang from then, and we remained lifelong friends. On November the 5th, 1963, Johnny Clifton introduced me to a slightly drunk young man on the steps outside of the Rainbow Rooms, our midweek rock and roll jiving venue. He asked me for a kiss, which I gave him with a smile. I already knew who he was. I glimpsed him briefly in the American bar at the Black Boy Hotel. He was a local musician with a mysterious, slightly dangerous reputation. Later he offered me a lift home, and that evening my future was sealed with more kisses. I had no idea where my heart was leading me. It definitely wasn't love at first sight, not even lust, I wrote in the late 70s. Not that he wasn't a handsome young man, he most certainly was. 6 foot tall, lean, blonde hair cut short and swept back from a clear, wide forehead. His eyes were grey-green, misty with a positive twinkle, though on this occasion pinkish round the edges due to alcohol, which was also causing him to grin somewhat foolishly and sway unnervingly, like a snake attempting to hypnotize its prey. The nose was perfect. I believe the word is Greek. Straight and finely chiseled, the nostrils slightly flared, set between two fine high cheekbones and above a beautifully shaped mouth. The lips, not too full, but certainly not thin. The teeth, which flashed at me through the constant grin, wide and straight. The The jaw was square and strong, not overly so, but in exact balance with the rest of the face. The total image was classic Greek. I dare say I was grinning back at him, disarmed and taken by surprise by his direct request. It was a short and tender kiss, a real connection, a brief meeting of lips, despite, or perhaps because of him being a little drunk. We grinned at each other, something was said, and I left those two on the wide steps of the Rainbow Rooms to continue up the remaining steps into the music of the dancing. The DJ was playing rock and roll records in a modern hall on the front of the stage, low lighting, lit a polished wooden floor, with a carpeted standing area by a bar to one side. I joined my friends, and in the twinkling lights from the glitter ball, we jived and smiled and laughed. From the corner of my eye, I saw Johnny and Alvin arrive. I was being watched. Alvin was not a dancer, but later in the evening he came over. "Do you have a lift?" he whispered in my ear. Smiling, I accepted his offer, and he left me to dance until I was ready to leave. I was excited, nervous. I saw him smiling at me again from the sidelines. My heart was beating faster, and not just from the dancing. I had heard rumours about Alvin, that maybe he took drugs because a friend had seen him collapse in his dressing room after a show, and that he had lived with a girlfriend. This was pretty outrageous in 1963 in Nottingham, where most teenagers, including me, drank alcohol and smoked cigarettes, but were pretty moderate in our habits except to the weekend at parties. So I was a little nervous, but already drawn to his disarming directness and exotic look. I wish I could remember us leaving the dance hall, walking together, talking, not talking, finding the Jaybirds van painted cream and decorated with red birds, and the Jaybirds painted in large red letters. I do remember him struggling to engage the gears, which caused me to wonder if that was because of his drinking. He assured me it was only a mechanical fault. By this time I didn't care. I was both confused and entranced. And now we're in 1968, and this was my first trip to America. At the end of their third US tour, and I arrived in San Francisco, having flown to New York and then got on a flight from New York to San Francisco. And in San Francisco, it was the year after the Summer of Love. This is November time. It's in San Francisco, a year after the Summer of Love, it seemed to me I'd discovered my true tribe. I felt at one with the sunshine, glorious colours, clothes, pretty people, loving smiles and hippie vibes. England seemed introverted, especially in cities where strangers don't tend to smile back at you when you smile at them. I'd been brought up in a social environment. I was outgoing, happy and curious. I found it difficult to contain my natural friendliness. Finally, I'd found a place where if I smiled, people smiled back. It sounds so simple, but it felt very profound. The women amazed me. So independent, confident, tanned, gorgeous, but far more predatory than their English counterparts, and Alvin was their quarry. I had a rapid education in the US rock scene and the groupies who occupied it, so different from the 10 years after UK blues fans. Nevertheless, Alvin was oblivious to their advances, delighted to seem to be with me after 10 weeks on the road. 10 years after played Bill Graham's Fillmore West. That was the first show I saw in the USA. It was a big open space, no static seating, with psychedelic light shows projected on the walls and ceiling. The whole place pulsated with colours produced by overhead projectors, liquid dyes, oil on water, slide projections and 16mm films, all manipulated to subtle effects in time with the music. A totally immersive experience. As the bands played several nights and multiple shows, the lighting teams developed incredibly well-timed effects to enhance the music's dynamics. They were as dedicated to their art as the musicians were to their music, as the audiences were to their own enjoyment and connection. It was thrilling and spellbinding, The perfect setup, arranged to give everyone a memorable night. Still photos from the Fillmore West gigs can't convey much beyond a glimpse of the reality. When the band went on, I sat on the floor with new friends, smoking good weed openly, and feeling the difference in the audience from the UK and how the band and Alvin reacted. It was so cool. If I had died and left the planet during one of those shows, it still would have been totally cool. As the music became more animated, the audience stood up and danced, arms held high and swaying like snakes, lithe bodies, hips moving to the beats, long hair on both girls and guys flying, with long loose skirts, dancing freeform, ballet moves and stretches, the light shows projected onto their bare skin, their faces, arms, shoulders, sometimes breasts, bare feet and legs. It was mesmerizing, like little kids playing, having fun, quite unlike the sexily dressed posing found in an 80s disco. This was ecstatic music. The music, the weed, the lights, all take you higher, leaving all your cares behind in a spirit of transcendence. And where are we going to next? Oh, we're going to Woodstock. It's now 1969. And on the Friday and Saturday, August, we'd caught a glimpse of dramatic news items about Woodstock on the TV in our hotel rooms, that it was the largest audience in history, that the freeways had been closed, that it was a national disaster. We couldn't wait to get there and see for ourselves. 500,000 hippies all gathered to get high and boogie in a field. We were hyped up about going there. How could we not be? We rose at 5 a.m. to catch a flight from St. Louis to New York, where limos waited to drive us up to Woodstock. But the freeways were blocked. So we were driven to the festival base, a Holiday Inn, 5 miles from the festival site. Outside on the "Welcome to the Holiday Inn" sign, usually reserved for Bill and Sue's 50th anniversary or Welcome Michigan Ford Dealers Convention. It just said Tranquility Base. It still makes me cry. A nod to the men on the moon. Breathe. Bands touring the USA get used to staying in Holiday Inns, opening the door to find bland though clean lobbies and bland though clean staff politely welcoming their motley crew. The scene in Tranquility Base might have been on the moon. No bland, clean, straight people in sight. It was crowded wall to wall with hippies, mind blown. It seemed we had taken over a small part of the universe. I thought it was fantastic. An organising hippie greeted Alvin and the band. "Hi guys, you will be going out to the site in a helicopter, performing and flying straight back out." Just the band, no old ladies. You'll only be gone about 2 hours. The old ladies were me and Ruth Ann, the drummer's wife. Thanks to the mighty rainstorm that was brewing, this 2-hour round trip would turn out to be famous last words. It wasn't till 4 o'clock the next morning that we got out the site. Alvin and I went off for a huddle. We had been watching this event on the news for 2 days. Staying at a Holiday Inn some distance away was the last thing I wanted. My tribe was gathered out there in those fields. I had to join them. Alvin was fantastic. He got it, no problem. "Man, my old lady comes or I don't go on," he told him. "Listen, man, Joe Cocker's old lady's up the road in a diner, waiting for Joe." "Well, that's fine for her, but not for me," I said. Calmly but directly, Alvin repeated his threat not to perform. "Okay, she'll get to come, but not with you. You have to go now. There isn't room in your helicopter. I promise I will get her on one." Phew. A hug and a kiss, and off go Alvin and the band. I'm still in the hippie Holiday Inn, distractedly chatting with Ruth Ann. 10 minutes later, I never take my eyes off the guy who passes us from time to time. Each time he passes, we remind him of his promise, and after a half hour of this, he says, "Okay, let's go." He says, "Okay, let's go." We're taken to a field where a large twin-blade Chinook sat on the ground, filling up with doctors and nurses. We joined them. As we boarded, it occurred to me that I hadn't actually asked Ruth Ann if she wanted to go and stay at the Holiday Inn. She was very straight, no drugs, didn't smoke or even drink, so maybe she wasn't keen as I was to fly to a large muddy field full of hippies. I do know today she's very glad she went. Having never been in a helicopter before, the noise of the rotor blades and the lift from the vertical takeoff was a sudden rush. Strapped in with the big side door open, we came over a hilltop and banked as we passed over the huge field of multicoloured people, a rainbow tribe, horizon to horizon, a sight as awesome as it was overwhelming. A disaster area? You must be kidding. This looked like heaven to me. We landed and walked to the backstage area. The crowded hillside reached away in the distance. I will always be grateful to Alvin for supporting me, for making sure I flew those last few miles to that extraordinary scene. What a fine friend. Once backstage with Alvin, it was obvious that their managers were hard at work securing the best spot for their bands. Even though this was now a free festival, the fences were pulled down and an ear-to-ear stone grin was the main accessory. The businessmen were still doing what they loved doing best, hustling. In the early 90s, R.A. Pennybaker, legendary rock documentary maker, revisited the Woodstock footage to produce the excellent Woodstock Diaries, which include a number of bands left out of the original movie. More delightfully for me personally, he added a brief backstage shot of Alvin, D'Antoni and myself walking down a set of steps. Alvin and I looked stunning, bedecked in colourful silks, tapestries, beads and fringes. Though it would massively perpetuate and enhance the festival's legend, the Woodstock movie was way into the future, and being filmed was not the consideration for the bands. The focus of their performing was this huge crowd. There was no thought on their part that they would wind up in a film of such huge importance. The filming was unobtrusive and didn't interfere with the music making. There was no stopping to refilm numbers, reposition cameras, nor sound or light checks. It was shot in true documentary style, recording the events as they took place. In the added Pennybaker footage, Alvin and Dee are in an intense discussion. Dee was giving an update on 10 years after his performance and also hustling on behalf of Joe Cocker. Then the black clouds rose over the hill. The storm had arrived and everything changed. Without the storm, Alvin and TYA would have performed in daylight on the Sunday afternoon. Daylight is never the best setting for high-octane electric blues rock. The high-key contrast of black night and intense spotlights enhances the drama. An audience immersed in darkness is more liberated as they lose their sense of being seen. The storm took over the day, not simply a rainstorm, but a huge, primeval force unleashing itself relentlessly. Rolling black clouds, torrents of cold rain, and high winds made the technicians anxious for the on-stage equipment. On either side of the stage were scaffolding towers, supporting not just a vast array of PA speakers, but intrepid climbers after a better view of the performers. They looked fragile in the onslaught. The tarpaulins that had shielded the stage during smaller, earlier showers were totally inadequate and soon became adrift, flapping about like untethered sails on a yacht. The stage area was resembling a galleon in a storm at sea. In the Woodstock movie, announcer Chipmunk's voice is cool and calm for most of the time, but in face of the storm, he becomes louder, more strident. "Please move away from the towers! Please move away from the towers! Hold on to your neighbour, man! Sit down and wrap yourself up! We're going to have to ride it out!" The audience, 500,000 of them, had enjoyed 2 days of great music and authentic community spirit. They were flying high and weren't about to be brought down by this fearsome climatic event. Country Joe braved the deluge and encouraged them to concentrate en masse to stop the rain. He led a chant, "No rain, no rain, no rain, no rain," until he had to quit because the torrent threatened to electrocute him while he held the microphone. Mass singing broke out. "Let the Sunshine In" from the musical Hair was ambitiously optimistic. There was no backstage in the sense of dressing rooms or hospitality areas or administration that you might expect at a festival, only empty rigging trucks that served as waterproof shelters. The bands waiting to perform, and by now there was quite a backlog, found shelter where they could, mostly in the trucks. Those that was tokers got steadily more stoned from the freely available marijuana. Leo joined us in the back of the U-Haul with a dozen people. We offered him a passing joint, which he momentarily declined, then happily relaxed and joined in. It was the only way to stay mellow in an electric storm. Alvin and I were also both cigarette smokers, and as the hours passed, the supply we thought we would need for the quick journey in and out of Woodstock ran out. At one point, Alvin was so desperate for nicotine, he was offering $20 for one cigarette, but they were not to be had. By the time he went on stage, he'd forgotten how many joints he'd substituted for cigarettes. Nevertheless, everyone remained pretty chilled backstage. How could we not? We could hear that huge audience singing, chanting, with no shelter anywhere. It was an awesome inspiration. Rumours spread backstage that the Straits, the CIA, or some such, had seeded the clouds. We weren't sure if this was possible or even what seeding the clouds might mean, but the idea that the straight world might feel threatened, so threatened by this peaceful gathering that they would engage in expensive sabotage, was strangely empowering to us all. So that was Woodstock. And now we're in the mansion. In fact, no, now I've left the mansion. And now I'm into something very dramatic that happened to me in 1974. Or 1975, somewhere at that point. So, I'd been in Earl's Court, where I was living, in one room at that point, and I'd been there and had visitor, Chrissy Wood, my dear friend, and we'd gone to a kind of nightclubby place on the end of the Earl's Court Road called, I can't even remember the name of it today. The Split Coconut, of course I can. But Chrissy said to me afterwards, why don't we go back to the Wick, which was this wonderful house they had on Richmond Hill, which is one of the most beautiful houses in London, really, and has this incredible view that goes all the way down to the Thames, because it's on the top of the hill. And it's a very magical place. And so we went back there in a taxi, and we went in. There was just the two of us. Had Woody been home, I would have slept in Haley's room at the front of the Wick. The plaque was still on the door from when Haley Mills had lived there as a child. Tonight, though, we got in the big king-size breast bed in the main oval bedroom. In her dressing room, Chrissy had picked out a hospital nightie, the kind with a funky front that opened down, frumpy front that opens down the back. She thought it was funny to put this on over her knickers, while telling me about how she had come by it on a trip to a hospital in Los Angeles. Stripping down to my knickers, I joined Chris in the bed. The oval bedroom had floor-to-ceiling windows, an incredible view over the terraced garden and on down Nightingale Lane, across the river meadows, all the way to the big bend in the Thames. There sits a small yacht, Glover's Island, with houseboats of all shapes and sizes moored around it, with more moored down the centre and banks of the river. That night the sky was clear, and a huge full moon lit up the idyllic landscape. The Gothic towers of the Petersham Hotel were silhouetted beyond the garden's terraces. It was stunning, an electric night. The brilliant, glittering moonlight reflected off the wide, calm surface of the ancient river. I remember the beauty of the view sparking the following wistful exchange. Wouldn't it be nice to have a smoke? It's a shame I don't have any with me, but that view is so lovely tonight. Yes, that would be great, but there isn't anything here. We carried on talking for a while. Chris talked about Woody, and I talked about Alvin, happily reminded of him in this house. And eventually our conversation petered out as we drifted off to our private dream worlds. I don't remember exactly what woke us, a noise or a voice, but very alarmingly, at about 6:30 in the morning, we were suddenly aware of 4 men in dark suits standing round the large bed. In the first few seconds, neither of us had any idea who these people were or what they were doing there or whether we were in any danger. It was terrifying and bizarre. From the bathroom, there was a loud crash, which turned out to be the dressing room door being kicked in. It was not locked. We were told by their leader and main spokesman that they were the drug squad. He held aloft a piece of paper, which he said was a warrant to search the house. He quickly put it back in his pocket without offering it up for us to read. We sat in the bed, adrenaline pumping, the covers pulled up, hearing people moving around and talking in the rooms below and around us. In all, there were at least a dozen plainclothes drug squad officers, a dozen, and uniformed police in the house. They also had Sniffer Dog and its handler. They asked us if there were any other people in the house. Their initial rather overexcited manner became more subdued when they realised we were the only occupants. We were not the big fish they'd hoped to catch. How to deal with 2 pretty young women, startled from sleep like a pair of fairy princesses, would prove to be quite taxing for their inventiveness. They sent out for a policewoman. All the men left while she supervised us getting out of bed, washed and dressed. At no time did any of the men see what we were wearing in the bed. We held the covers up around us. It was left to their imaginations. For what seemed hours, they crawled all over the wick, room by room, checking everywhere for drugs. For the entire time we remained in the bedroom, sitting on the bed. Their leader, the red-haired and florid face, who had been so upbeat announcing their purpose, was Detective Sergeant Edward Ellison. He sat with Chris and me, talking and asking questions. Though he would deny it in court, he asked Chris about Keith Richardson and Ether Pallenberg, whether they still lived in Cheney Walk. The elephant in the room was that we all knew they had come looking for Keith, Mick and Woody, and anyone else who might enhance their career promotion. But they had to carry on with this overstaffed affair as if we warranted the taxpayers' expense, which quite obviously we didn't. I was quite happy to talk to him, just small talk, although I was still quite shocked. I knew we hadn't even had a smoke in the house the night before. We were totally straight. What could they do to us, even though we were so outnumbered? In my total naivety, I thought the law was also straight, not corrupt, and we were innocent of anything connected with drugs in this place at this time. I thought we had nothing to fear. Of course, I had heard that drugs were planted on people, but with so many of them around here and us, I couldn't see how that would happen. Chris was much quieter, possibly nervous that Woody and his musical mates might have left something behind when they had left to go on tour. Sensing her mood and feeling protective towards her, I chatted to Ellison about nothing in particular, to try and keep his attention from Chris, to take some pressure off of her. A couple of times Chris answered Ellison's questions with, "I take full responsibility," which he tried to get her to elaborate, but I knew she was saying this to protect me from anything they might find. She was saying, this is my house, and my friend here is an innocent visitor. It's at times like these you discover the depths in your friends and their loyalty. From the basement, we could hear someone playing on the drum kit and music from the jukebox. It was starting to feel more like a gawping at the Rockstairs house and lifestyle tour than a serious police operation. In the bedroom there were endless little curios, bits of paper, envelopes, correspondence, photos, creative debris on the mantelpiece and cabinets. Everything was looked at, looked in, shaken or squeezed like a bizarre archaeological dig, a treasure hunt. It started to become pretty obvious that they were getting desperate when they went so far as to unscrew the large brass knobs from the bed on which we were sitting. This revealed large quantities of white powder, which excited their forensic curiosity. Several did the classic finger-to-the-tongue test before bagging it up in a large plastic bag. Had it been a Class A substance, it would have been very valuable and no doubt worth a long prison term. It turned out to be nothing more sinister than French chalk. But in court, you'll hear their version of what took place that morning. Kingston Crown Court, circa 1975, was a very grand, imposing building. In contrast, Richmond's Magistrates' Court was more like a fusty old school hall set up for a play about a court case. The Crown Court was purpose-built and its purpose was to intimidate. We'd been in the Magistrates' Court 3 times. One time the police didn't even turn up. And we only had to tell them we were not guilty, and then they had to put us in the Crown Court. So this is the first trial that we had in the Crown Court. The defendant in British law is innocent until proved guilty. You have to keep reminding yourself of your innocence as you're led into the court and put in the dock. It's surreal. An overused word, but it's an apt description of the UK court proceedings. The judge and counsellors in black robes and arcane wigs, the judge's big leather VIP chair behind his elevated bench, the raised sections for the jury, the enclosed dock where the innocent defendants sit, facing the judge, flanked by police officers. The raised witness box, where the cast of those present on the day of the crime swear on the Bible and solemnly profess to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help them God. How bizarre it all becomes to you, the accused, as you sit and watch policemen, policewomen, and detective inspectors stand in the witness box on oath and openly lie about the things that you know, never took place. Because on the day that you were all together, we saw what was happening. It is a mind-numbing experience like a bad dream, only it really is happening. The judge, Frederick Gibbons, an elderly and prudish-looking, completely out of his depth, trying to understand everyday life in the rock and roll mansion on the hill, the comings and goings of musicians, their crews and hanger-on. He could have been hearing a script by Samuel Beckett as he stage managed the proceedings, trying to make sense of it all. The prosecuting counsel, Mr. Alistair Hill, short and rotund in a wide black robe and a tiny wig perched on his round head, was soon nicknamed by us the pig in the wig. Not very original, but it relieved the tension. Chris's solicitor, Jeremy Horsfall, was a jolly and upbeat fellow who, when we were out of court, loved to tell us stories about clients he had defended, accused of weird sexual peccadillos. One chap that stuck in my mind was apparently turned on by bicycle tubing. Jeremy recommended that Chris hire a heavyweight barrister, Sir Peter Rawlinson, Conservative Member of Parliament for Epsom and Ewell and former Attorney General. He was tall, handsome, and with a presence and gravitas, he outranked everyone else in the court. Like the judge, he also had little idea about the rock and roll world and even less, it seemed, about cocaine. We would educate him so well that when Keith Richards was busted later that year, it was to Sir Peter that he turned for his defence. The main evidence on which the drug squad's case hinged was verbal, what we were supposed to have said in that couple of hours in the bedroom at the Wick, as they ransacked the house around us. The only statement they presented that was true was Chris saying, "I take full responsibility," which I knew and they knew was her way of saying, "This is my house, and whatever you found here had nothing to do with anyone else." It was never an admission of guilt, just a statement made out of decency to protect a close friend, the honourable way to behave. However, they had claimed that Chris went on to say, "I thought nobody was unduly worried about what we did in private. I don't use much coke, just a small amount to have a pleasant time." A complete fabrication, of course. As was a statement attributed to me. "Now you know why we didn't hear you getting in. We had a great evening." Another complete fabrication. No one seemed to realise that cocaine is a stimulant. We were sound asleep, which meant this statement of mine would have been preposterous. This would come in handy later. Alison read out a second statement I was supposed to have made. "I've committed the terrible crime of enjoying myself in private. I thought society had progressed beyond that." So here we were, two little airheads in a big bed saying, "Oops, fair cop gov, we done it." How they had managed to persuade the Crown Prosecution Service to agree to this trial on the basis of these statements and a minuscule amount of cocaine dust scraped from 8 different surfaces over 3 floors of a large house will always be a mystery to me. We were both women with no previous police records of any kind, and the case was so slight, the evidence so flimsy, that their only hope was to besmirch our reputations. So it was that WPC Eleanor McGowan stated falsely on day 1 that we were naked together in the bed, and that when she examined Chris's arms for needle marks, she didn't tell her to take her clothes off, as both women were naked when they got out of bed, I think. The tabloids now had a story to titillate their readers. A week of front-page headlines began. What the Yard saw in Sleeping Beauty's bedroom. Girls lay almost naked in a giant bed. Pop star's wife and a daylight drug raid on 2 Sleeping Beauties. What the police found in a pop girl's boudoir. Pop girl's bedmate. Rude awakening for the pop girls when the drug squad called. Sleeping Beauties held in a drug raid at the Wick. The fact that we were both in our 20s and therefore women lacked the sexy ring of pop girls, but reality was disappearing before our very eyes. Many hours were spent in court discussing our supposed nakedness, in a classic brass bed which started out large, became bigger, then king-sized, possibly emperor-sized, and eventually circular. What was the charge again? Oh yes, possession of 15 milligrams of cocaine between us, which 12 drug squad officers and police had scraped from 8 surfaces on 3 floors of a house. Nonetheless, whether or not we were wearing flimsy panties became far more important than their flimsy evidence, and generated more ludicrous headlines and photo captions. "We were not naked in bed," said Chrissy. "I was wearing a nightie." Loraine Burgon says she was wearing panties in bed. The girl in my bed by a pop wife. After the prosecution had laid out their case, which hinged on the police evidence, or our supposed statements, Sir Peter began to whittle away at their evidence by cross-examination. Alison admitted they'd expected to find more people there. Though he wouldn't say who, he eventually said the names Keith and Anita meant something to him. After Sir Peter pulled some theatrics with a sugar cube, describing the amount as a 277th part of 1 sugar cube, Alison admitted the amount of cocaine was very tiny, only a trace. Detective Sergeant Rodney Pearson told the court they had been looking for a large quantity of cocaine, which we did not find. Alistair Hill, the pig in the wig, bullied and badgered Chris for 4 hours in the witness box. Realising she was vulnerable and overwhelmed by what was taking place, he tried over and over to trip her up in her evidence, even though in her frustration to convince him that guilt lay elsewhere, her description of the loose comings and goings of life at the Wick and became sometimes exaggerated. She brilliantly walked a tightrope to protect Woody and establish her own defence. The house locks had been changed maybe a half dozen times because keys fell into the wrong hands. We'd been in bed together because she was nervous of being alone. The bed was bigger than king size, the size of a small room. After 4 hours, he gave up. He'd misjudged Chris's inner strength and was left looking like a bully. Hill spent much less time on me. I described with calm resolve the details of the bust and the arrest, the way the police had behaved during the raid, the fact that we were not cautioned, that their verbal evidence was untruthful. Chris and I were in marked contrast under cross-examination. Hill saw no weaknesses in me that day and soon realised my clarity was unhelpful to the prosecution's case. Watching Chris being terrorised by him made me angry and clear-headed. And you want to know what happened, don't you? You'll have to buy the book. No, I'm kidding. That's a joke. What happened was, that first trial, the jury couldn't decide after a couple of hours, and the judge, Gibbons, was just not happy about it. He wanted us to be guilty. He wanted someone to be guilty, and we were the people who he could make guilty. So he ordered a retrial. So we had to go to court all over again. And I won't read you the retrial. It is worth reading about. And Sir Peter Rawlinson was absolutely amazing, and a real tour de force on the day. And meanwhile, we'd educated him a lot about what cocaine was about, and that helped. And he said to me, or we were told, you know, if the jury's out for a long time, it's a good sign. They were. And that if any of them smile at you when they come back in, that'll be a good sign. And one of them smiled when they came back in, and we were found not guilty. Quite right, too. That's it.